are you? I'm glad that you're back. Today we're going to talk about something that is very important to understanding Bitcoin, and that is the blockchain and public and private keys. Now, once you understand that, then that will give you the confidence that blockchain and Bitcoin are going to be secure for a long time. Now, if you remember one of my previous videos, I told you that Bitcoin has never been hacked, and that is absolutely true. It continues to be the case. So let's talk about what blockchain is.
What if there's a technological advancement so powerful that it transforms the very basic pillars of our society? A technology which fundamentally influences the way that our economy, governance systems, and businesses function, and could change our understanding of trade, ownership, and trust. This technology already exists, and it's called cryptocurrency. People often think of Bitcoin as only virtual money or a transaction system. Bitcoin is a groundbreaking internet technology for which money is merely one of the possible applications. Money exists to facilitate trade. Through the centuries, trade has become incredibly complex. Everyone trades with everyone worldwide. Trade is recorded in bookkeeping, and this information is often isolated and closed to the public. For this reason, we use third parties and middlemen we trust to facilitate and approve our transactions. Think of governments, banks, accountants, notaries, and the paper money in your wallet. We call these trusted third parties. This brings us to the essence of Bitcoin. Bitcoin software enables a network of computers to maintain a collective bookkeeping via the internet. It is public and available in one digital ledger, which is fully distributed across the network. We call this the blockchain. In the blockchain, all transactions are logged, including information on the time, date, participants, and amount of every single transaction. Each node in the network owns a full copy of the blockchain. On the basis of complicated, state-of-the-art mathematical principles, the transactions are verified by the so-called Bitcoin miners, who maintain the ledger. The mathematical principles also ensure that these nodes automatically and continuously agree about the current state of the ledger and every transaction in it. If anyone attempts to corrupt a transaction, the nodes will not arrive at a consensus, and hence will refuse to incorporate the transaction in the blockchain. So every transaction is public, and thousands of nodes unanimously agree that a transaction has occurred on date X at time Y. It's almost like there's a notary present at every transaction. This way, everyone has access to a shared single source of truth. This is why we can always trust the blockchain. A Bitcoin is divisible in 100 million units, and each unit is both individually identifiable and programmable. Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies have caused a paradigm shift.
Okay, that was really good. I really wanted you to have a little bit different view of what the blockchain is, and so I thought that was a good thing to do. Now we're ready to talk about public keys and private keys. The thing that makes the blockchain work is that every entry in that blockchain has to be signed, and it has to be validated as being signed by the right people. So that's how Fred doesn't get into the blockchain, because he doesn't have the right to get in. We'll talk about that a little bit later too. I'm going to make the private key, public key discussion fairly short. You need to understand it well enough to have confidence in it. I don't think you need to understand everything there is to know about it. So let's start with that, and we'll give you a little bit of a discussion as we go.
Public and private keys, what they are and what they do. Public and private keys are important because without them, you can't send or receive transactions. So
this gentleman goes by the name of Cloud Monkey on YouTube. Feel free to look him up. He's been inactive for a couple years, but he made some really good recordings here. And so I'm going to take pieces of this to help explain what the public key and private keys are. So first we're going to give a discussion about what cryptography is like.
And so we're going to go back a few years before the 1970s when this sort of cryptography was created, and we're going to send a secret message to each other. I'm going to send a secret message to you, and that secret message is going to be hello. But I don't want anyone else to know what it says. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to encrypt this message with a key or with a cipher. And in this case, it's a really simple one, and that's shift one forward. So for every letter in the alphabet, we're going to shift it one letter forward. So H becomes I, E becomes F, L becomes N, and O becomes P. And so rather than sending you the message hello, which anyone could read, I'm going to cipher it, and what spits out is this message, IFMMP. And so if we send that, then people might intercept it and be able to read IFMMP, but they don't understand what that means. Now, you have now received this message from me. You know the key, so all you need to do is reverse that key and shift one backwards, and then I becomes H, F becomes E, M becomes L, and P becomes O. And so you then decipher that message, and it becomes hello. How can I encode and encrypt and send you that key over the internet without anyone finding out about it? And this is where public and private keys play a really important role in solving this problem. Rather than just having the one key that we had back here that we both need to know, we now have two keys that are related to each other. So we take key one, we run it through cryptography and get key two, and key one acts as the locking mechanism, and key two is needed to unlock or to decipher the code. And so these two work together. So what happens is we take our hello message, we encode it using key one, and we get this message that no one can read. Now, in order to decipher that, we need key two to get back to our hello message. So if we take key one, get this garbled message, and then try and use key one over here to try and turn it back into hello, that's not going to work. We can only decode it with key two. And so these two are related. And so the way this would work on the internet is I would take my public key and I would share it all over the internet with the world. So my dad could send me a message, or the Prince of Nigeria could send me a message about how he wants to give me $7 million. So either of those two people could take the message and then encode it using my public key, and then they would get a message that nobody could read. Only I, with the private key, can decode that message either into hello from my dad or into, hey, I want to send you $7 million from the Prince of Nigeria. And the reason this works is that the private key is so big and so difficult to work out that it would take millions and millions and millions of years, even with highly advanced computing, in order to guess that private key correctly. So the chances of someone guessing that private key are very, very, very close to zero. It would take people millions of years to crack it, so it's not feasible for people to crack it. So this is why this works. Bitcoin takes this technology and reverses it. So let's say I want to send one Bitcoin to Bob. I would represent that as I want to send from my public key to Bob's public key. Now let me show you an example. Here's a transaction here. This is someone sending from this particular public key to that particular public key. So that is the transaction, and then it's hashed, which we will talk about in a second. So basically this is me, and I'm saying I want to send money from me to Bob, but I need to prove that I can actually send that money. So let's sidetrack.
This gives you a pretty good idea of what the public and private keys look like now. And so what he's going to talk about now is how to make sure that everything stays safe.
So a public key is used in decryption, but it's also used as a safety box, and anyone can deposit funds into this safety box. Our private key is used to take money out of this public box and give it to someone else. So anyone can use my public key and send money into this box. So I want to send one Bitcoin to Bob. So I'm sending it from my public key to Bob's public key. Is we then take our private key and we use our private key with the help of cryptography to encrypt that message. If we look on block,
he's going to talk about something that's called a hash. Basically, that's just part of the crypto thing, and it just makes a short word out of a very long word.
Blockchain.info, then we can see the hash up here. Okay, so this is the hash of this transaction. So I take the transaction and I use my private key to go ahead and create the hash or create the encryption.
At this point, you're probably freaking out. Don't freak out. The wallet handles all of this stuff.
Now, my public key in the transaction, that, hey, this is my public key. So I've taken the transaction and used my private key to encode it, and then anyone can use my public key and that will successfully decode the message. So that will take this hash by using my public key, and that will decode the message to say that I am sending, in this case, 0.016 Bitcoin to this address, or in my example, it will decode the message and say that I am sending 1 Bitcoin to Bob.
Okay, this is how you get the public key. Pay attention here.
In fact, the public key is created by starting with a private key, using cryptography to then create the public key. So these two, the private key and the public key, are linked together. So there will only ever be one private key that matches up with the public key. You can't have multiple private keys for a single public key.
But you can have multiple public keys for one private key. In fact, that's exactly what your wallets do. They create public keys for you just by asking to send Bitcoin.
So what's to stop someone hijacking an account and simply putting a transaction out there saying that they want to send 1 Bitcoin to criminal? So they want to go from a certain public key, and because all the public keys are out there, you could choose any one. And what's to stop them using a made up private key in order to get the encoding? Well, the problem with that is that the public key that you start with, so if we go back and look at this transaction, so this public key is sending money to this public key. So the public key that you start with is used to decode the message. And so if this criminal makes up their own private key, this public key won't be able to decipher this message. It'll take this message and try and decipher it, and what will come out will just be some more gobbledygook. Okay, so it won't decipher the message, and so we know that that person doesn't have the private key. And so this is how private and public keys work in Bitcoin.
When he says lockbox, he means Bitcoin blockchain.
So just a quick recap, the public key is our lockbox. It's the place that anyone can send money, but no one can take money out of this lockbox without the private key. And the way they take money out of the lockbox is that they create a transaction and then they display that encoded message to the entire network, to all the Bitcoin nodes, and everybody out there is then able to use the public key to decode that message, which proves that you have the private key and that you're authorized to send that money. It's added to the block and you no longer have access to that money. Bob now has that 1 Bitcoin.
So there you have it. That is blockchain, private keys, and public keys. The blockchain for Bitcoin is simply a list of all of the transactions from one public key to another. That's it. That's the whole thing. And that's what keeps it most secure, is that that is all it takes. So now that we know that, let's move on and talk about wallets. This is Dr. Darwin. See you later.